Hi, good evening, and welcome back to our Parshas webcast. We are going to learn tonight the portion of Vayechi. Vayechi is the last portion in the book of Genesis, in the book of Parshas. And with this parsha, we end the story of the forefathers. You'll remember last week, Jacob and his sons came down to Egypt to be near Yosef, who is now the leader of Egypt. And Yaakov was 130 years old when he descended to Egypt. And in this portion, the portion begins with Vayechi Yaakov. Yaakov lived, and the name of the portion is Vayechi, which means he lived, and it's a reference to Yaakov. Yaakov lived, but when you look at the entire portion is about Yaakov's death, not about his life. The last blessing that he gave to Joseph and his sons, and then to his own sons, and then the actual story of how he died and how they brought his remains to Israel for burial. So the entire portion, from the beginning to the end, talks about Yaakov's death, not his life. And therefore the obvious question is, why was the entire portion called Vayechi, a reference to Yaakov as living rather than as Yaakov passing on? So there are a number of things I want to say about this. Number one, there's a Hasidic word that Yaakov was able to live. How long did Yaakov live in Egypt now? For 17 years. He died when he was 147. And the word goes that Yaakov's best years was those years that he lived in Egypt. And that, of course, begs the question, why are his best years the ones that he lived in Egypt? And the reason, of course, is because then he saw, as we learned last week, that he had Yehuda established there in Egypt, a place where his children and grandchildren would be able to learn Torah and daven and be connected to spiritual things, to live the life of a Jew. And because of that, and on top of that, having seen that Yosef and his children lived in Egypt and yet were able to remain completely dedicated and never lose focus of who they were and what they are here to accomplish, and they did accomplish all this in Egypt. So this naturally was turned out to be his best years, because what's a person's life? What is a person's life? What is life all about? Well, if you're not a very mundane person that seeks material comforts and so on, you're more into, you have your priorities right, and your neshama guides you, and life becomes more about the purpose for why we're here. And what was the purpose for why Yaakov was here? Purpose of Yaakov is to bring about the Jewish people and to train them and educate them to become a light and guide to the nations and to bring holiness to the entire world. So in Israel, and prior to his descent to Egypt, none of this was really put to the test. He himself lived in his father's house for 63 years. Then he went to learn in yeshiva for another 14. And then he went to Choron, where he lived for 20 years, where he built his family. And then he came back to Israel and lived another 30 years or so. So he was never, so by the time his children grew up, they were all in Israel. And now that finally, for the first time, he's able to see them in action, in making the world and Egypt, especially Egypt, which is a very unholy place. So therefore, when they were able to accomplish this and not compromise their commitment to Yaakov's ideals, this was to him the best years, though these were to him the best years of his life. But those years came to an end in this portion. And that's why the portion is called Vayechi, because in this portion, this story is where his ultimate life's goal and mission was brought to the fore, which was actually materialized, became a reality. So therefore, that was the best. Those were the years of life, of real life. But then his days to pass away came closer, and he told Yosef that I want you to bury me, when I die, I want you to bury me in the land of Egypt. And he said to him to...
Really, in Egypt?
No, I'm sorry, I said Egypt, I mean in Israel. And he said to him that I want you to hold me and take an oath that you will not bury me in Egypt, but that you will raise me and bring me up to the land of Israel for burial. And Yosef actually took an oath. So here I want to stop for a few minutes and explain why was it that he forced him to take an oath. I mean, it's not like Yosef didn't promise him to do it. He already promised him that he would. He said, yes, Dad, Father, I will do as you say and take you to the land of Israel. And Yosef was the man in charge of Egypt. He was able to do it. It's not like he couldn't do it. So why did Yaakov insist that he swear to him, that he took an oath that he would bury him in the land of Egypt? So there are a number of explanations for this. Rashi himself mentions later on one reason, that he made him take an oath, and that wasn't because he didn't trust that Yosef's word without an oath was untrustworthy, but because he was afraid that Pharaoh wouldn't let him. That Pharaoh would try to do everything in his power to make sure that Yaakov's remains stayed in Egypt, because last week we learned that Yaakov was the one that blessed Egypt and brought an end to the famine. So such a holy person they would probably want buried there. So he was afraid that Pharaoh would tell Joseph, I'm not letting you go. In other words, Joseph would have all the best of intentions, and from his part, he would definitely have done it. But he was afraid that Pharaoh wouldn't let him. By administering an oath, this put pressure on Pharaoh. Why? So here's an interesting thing. Yosef, the kings of Egypt, had a rule or a condition that in order to be the king of Egypt, you had to know all the 70 languages of the world. And Pharaoh knew 69 of them, or most of them. He knew every one of them except for one. Which one didn't he know? Hebrew. And Lashon Kodesh he did not know. The Holy Tongue he did not know. Yosef, on the other hand, had that advantage over Pharaoh. When Yosef came to Egypt and he became the viceroy, it became known to Pharaoh that he has one language that he knows that Pharaoh doesn't know. See, he was afraid now that Yosef would disclose this information and unseat Pharaoh, because you could not be a king without knowing all the languages. So what Pharaoh did was, before he made him or during, he made him take an oath that he would not disclose this information. He wouldn't reveal to anyone that Pharaoh lacks the knowledge of Hebrew. So now, Yaakov comes now at the end of his life and makes Joseph swear that he will take him to Egypt. To Israel, thank you. Now, this will definitely, the oath was directed mainly so that Pharaoh shouldn't stop him. Because if Pharaoh tells him, no, Joseph, I really don't want you to take your father's remains, I'd rather have him buried here. So he says, I took an oath. If Pharaoh tells him, you took an oath, I'm sorry, but I still don't want you to go. So now Joseph will say, if I can violate my father's oath, I can violate the oath I made to you. So this way, he made Yosef take an oath to make sure that Pharaoh doesn't stop him. So it wasn't for Joseph as much as it was for Pharaoh. Another reason is given, that it was even for Joseph, because Joseph, definitely when he told his father that he would take him to Israel, he had every intention to do so. But being the viceroy of Egypt, so many things come up. And what happens if you want and you really want, but you're unable? You're torn in every direction, you need it here, you can't go. There's all kinds of things that come up that can prevent this from eventually happening. So Yaakov made him take an oath. The power of an oath is, you make a promise to someone, I'll do this for you. All right. So are you thinking about what you promised all day long? No, you gave him a word, you're going to do it. When the time comes to do it, you'll do everything you can to do it, undoubtedly. But you're not thinking about it all the time. When you take an oath is already in Torah, in Judaism, a very serious thing that under no circumstances could you violate an oath. It's a very severe to violate an oath. So what do you do when you take an oath? You're constantly thinking about it. I got to make sure everything I do, I shouldn't do anything that can eventually cause that I shouldn't fulfill this oath. So what Yaakov wanted was that it should be on Joseph's head a whole time. That anything he puts in place, he should make sure, wait a minute, is this going to harm my chances to fulfill this oath later? So that there's no question that when the time comes, everything will be smooth and everything will be able to, he'll be able to do this. Had he not taken an oath, so although he would have every intention of doing it, but if it's not on his mind the whole time, certain things could be done in the interim that would eventually turn out to be in other words, it would be something that would make it impossible for him later to do it. He didn't want that to happen. He wanted to make sure that from that day and on, everything he does should be in a way that should support that eventual promise that he will take him to the land of Israel. After that event, he took the oath, and then he says to him, Yaakov gets very sick, and Yosef realizes that his days are numbered, so he brings him his two sons, Ephraim and Menashe, to be blessed by their father Jacob, by his father Jacob, by their grandfather. And of course, Menashe was the firstborn, Ephraim was the second, and therefore when Joseph brought them to Jacob, he placed Ephraim to Jacob's to Jacob's left, and Menashe to Jacob's right, so that he should put his right hand on Menashe and his left hand on Ephraim. But when it came to the blessing itself, Yaakov changed and put the right hand on the youngest son, the left hand on the older son. And Yosef was very disturbed by this. He said, Father, that's you made a mistake. I don't know if you said you made a mistake, but he said that's not the correct order. The older one is Menashe. And Yaakov told him, I know that Menashe is older, and I did not do this by mistake, but Ephraim will exceed him, and therefore I'm going to put my right hand on top of him. He will even be greater than Menashe. And the words he tells him is as follows. He says to him, but his father refused. He said, I know, my son, that he is the firstborn. I know. He too will father a nation, and he too will be great, but his younger brother will be greater than him, and his children's fame will spread throughout the nation. So therefore he placed Ephraim before Menashe. Now this itself begs for great clarification. If you're telling me that Ephraim is really the one that is the first, should be the first, what is the idea of a firstborn? Why does a firstborn receive more from his father than the other children? In the laws of inheritance, the firstborn gets a double portion, twice as much as everyone else. Why is that? Because it says that if a father puts, and parents put into their firstborn, he has more of the parents than the other ones. He carries a certain advantage in that he's the first, and therefore he is entitled to a little extra, not attention, but an extra, the inheritance, as I mentioned, for you, the blessing. He has an advantage over the brothers. Now, if you're telling me that Ephraim is the one that had the advantage in this case, as Yaakov just got through saying to Yosef, that he will be greater than Menashe, that means that Ephraim in this case has all the qualities of the firstborn. So then why didn't God arrange it that Ephraim was born first? Then why was Menashe born first? If you're going to make Ephraim the advantage, the one with the advantages, and he will be greater, which is the stuff of a firstborn. Those are the qualities of a firstborn. Why did it end up that Menashe was born first? Why didn't God arrange it that Ephraim should be born first and be a firstborn on every level? Therefore, we must say that Ephraim's advantage over Menashe was only in one respect. But from a different point of view, in other respects, Menashe was still had a certain advantage over Ephraim, and that's why he was born first. But as far as Yaakov is concerned, the greater advantage belongs to Ephraim, and therefore Ephraim was given the blessing before Menashe where he had his right hand put on his head. So we need to explain over here what makes Menashe the great one, and therefore he's born first, and what makes Ephraim the great one, for which reason he is blessed first by Yaakov. You understand the question, yeah? Before I answer that question, let me just quickly go through the rest of the Parsha. The rest of the Parsha discusses the story of Yaakov blessing his other sons. And he bestows a beautiful blessing on each one of his sons, Reuven, all the way down to Binyamin. And he foresees the future for them. He foretells it to them. And it's a wonderful farewell from Yaakov to his sons. At the end, eventually Yaakov does pass away. And they make a great procession from the land of Egypt all the way to the land of Israel. All the sons went up, entire family with a multitude of people, and they gave him a great honor. And they finally arrived at the cave of Machpelah, in the city of Hebron, where they were going to bury Jacob. Now they were confronted with a new problem. As they get to the city of Hebron and the cave of Machpelah, you know what the cave of Machpelah is. That was the place that Adam and Eve were buried. Avram and Sarah were buried. Yitzchak and Rivka were buried. And Leah was buried there. Now Yaakov is the 8th person to be buried there. That cave had 8 places for burial. And the 7 were already full, and now Yaakov is going to be buried there. If you remember, Abraham was the one that bought this cave from Ephraim, and therefore it went as an inheritance to Yitzchak, who got buried there, and now it passed on to Yitzchak's sons, to Yaakov but there was another son. There was Esau.
Right.
So Esau appeared at this juncture. He came to the cave of Machpelah to protest and make sure they don't bury Yaakov there. Because he said, I want to be buried here. I have an equal claim to this burial spot, just like Yaakov was. So now they don't know what to do. So they told him, what do you mean? But you already gave up. You wrote a contract to our father, to Jacob, that you are giving up your rights to the land of Israel, which he did. So you have no right here anymore. Our father bought that right from you, and you sold him the birthright and everything, the right to the land of Israel. So he says, where do you have such a document? Could you show me the document? The problem was that they didn't bring the document with them from Egypt. So now they're stuck. They have to send someone down to Egypt to go get the document. So they did that. They took one of the brothers, Naphtali. Naphtali, in this portion, Yaakov compares him to a hare, to a gazelle. And a gazelle runs exceedingly fast. So he had the power to run quick, so they said that you go back to Egypt. Now, from Hebron to Egypt is a very long time. I mean, even if you run fast, it's quite a journey. It's days. It's not, not around the corner. So now they have to wait with Yaakov's remains till Naphtali comes back. Now, one of Yaakov's grandchildren was a young man by the name of Chushim. He was the son of Dan. Chushim was deaf. Couldn't hear. So he saw they're not burying his father. They're his grandfather. So he asked, what is the problem? Why are we not burying our grandfather? So they told him what had happened, that Esau is here and he's demanding his, right, and they said, you sold it. He said, show me the contract, and we had to send someone back to the land of Egypt. But they couldn't communicate this with him really, because he wasn't able to hear.
Yeah.
But they did somehow communicate to him that Esau was making trouble, was not allowing this to happen. So without thinking very much, he took a knife and he beheaded Esau. He killed him. He beheaded Esau. And the tradition is that Esau's head fell, and it fell into the cave, and he was buried near Yitzchak in that cave. It's interesting that they have at the cave of Machpelah a certain area. I don't know if you've ever been there. Have you ever been to Hebron?
No.
Oh, you must go there. But it's a very interesting place. But in the building of the tomb of the patriarchs, they have a place there where it says this is where Esau's head was buried. They have it there till today. So whether or not it's accurate, I'll leave that up to you to figure out. But there is a section there that is demarked marked as the place where Esau's head was buried. But that was the story of Chushim, the son of Esau. The son of Dan, who killed his uncle or his great uncle, and he said, "What a disgrace! Our grandfather's remains are, going to stay here for days because of this guy." So he killed him, and they once that happened, of course, they buried Yaakov, and that was the end of it. Eventually, the brothers come back to Egypt with Yosef, and now they panicked. Why did they panic? Because they were afraid that Yosef was really still very angry at them for what they had done to him, and that he held a grudge. And only out of respect for his father, Yaakov, did he not
act on
it, exactly. Did he not torture his brothers or pay them back for what they had done to him? But now that Yaakov has passed away, they were very afraid that
He would exact revenge.
That he would now, yeah, exactly, he would take revenge. So they came and begged him for mercy. And they made up a little bit of a story. They told him that Yaakov had instructed them before his death that they should tell Yosef in his name that he begs him not to behave this way towards them. Of course, that wasn't the case. Yaakov never told them this because Yaakov never suspected that Yosef would exact revenge from them, and therefore Yaakov never told them this. So how were they allowed to make the story up? So Rashi explains that in order to make peace, for the purposes of peace, sometimes you're allowed to even say something that is not 100% true. And we learn from that for peace you're allowed to sometimes say an untruth. You have to be careful where, what, when, but there's in some cases that is correct. And we learn it from this story. Anyway, at the end of the portion, Yosef is buried. Yosef dies, and he is buried. Where is he buried? He already is buried in Egypt. But before he dies, he makes them promise him, tells them a prophecy, that you will eventually all go out of Egypt and come back to Israel. But when that happens, I ask you to take my remains with you, dig me up, and take my bones with you to the land of Israel and bury me in Israel. And they did that. When Moshe takes the Jews out of Egypt, at the Exodus, he takes himself the bones, he finds them, and he carried the bones together with the ark throughout the whole desert, and they eventually brought him to Shechem, to Nablus, to be buried in that city, and he's still buried. He's there, and there's a shrine, there's a big building where they built around Joseph's grave, and Jews pray there every year, and that's in the city of Nablus, which unfortunately has been in control of the Palestinians for the last 10 years, or 20 or 15, whatever, some years.
Machpelah also, right?
Machpelah is not in the control of the Palestinians, no. Because Hebron, they didn't give back the whole Hebron. They gave them sections, but the Machpelah, the cave, and there's a whole Jewish section in Hebron, with a bunch of 85 families live there. It's quite an interesting city. When you're in Israel next time, you must go there. So that's the gist of the story. And there's another interesting detail here. It's interesting, Yosef is buried in Egypt. Why is Yosef buried in Egypt? The last verse of the Torah is, Yosef died, and they embalmed him, and they put him in a coffin in the land of Egypt. And that's the very last words. And after that we say, Chazak, Chazak, V'nis Chazek, which is what we proclaim every time we end a book in the Torah. We take strength. We say, let's be strengthened, so that we can go on to the next book. And the Rebbe once, I remember I was at this Fabrengen in 1987, in January of 1987, the Rebbe addressed this posuk. And he said, what kind of strength could one garner, when with reading about something so depressing that Yosef died and he was buried in Egypt, he wasn't even buried in Israel. How does that, you're ending off on such a low note. And then you say, Chazak, we're going to be strong based on what we just read. Give us something better at the end, end it off with something more positive to give us strength. But the Rebbe saw in this a beautiful message. He said that Yosef was buried in Egypt. That's the ultimate strength for the Jewish people, because the Jewish people remained in Egypt. So the very fact that he allowed himself to be buried in Egypt and not to be taken to Israel was the greatest source of strength for the Jewish people for those 200 years that they were there as slaves, or less, because since Joseph died, it was less than 200 years. But that itself was the greatest source of strength for the Jewish people, that they had Joseph's holy remains with them in Egypt, so that every time they felt dejected or broken or dispirited, they were able to go to Yosef's grave, pray, and get strength. So that very thought that Yosef is buried together with us in Egypt is the greatest strength. The Rebbe learned this, spoke about it regarding his father-in-law, whose name was also Yosef, who was also buried in Egypt of today, which is the diaspora in New York. In New York, yeah. I mean, Egypt as a metaphor for the exile, the diaspora. And the Rebbe learned, he said, that the fact that his father-in-law, and of course today we can say the Rebbe as well, was buried in New York and not taken to Israel is also a great source of strength for the Jews of the diaspora, that is a holy place where you can come and daven and get strength.
Could you imagine?
So that's a great...
If you didn't have the
all right, exactly. So that's the chazak, the great strength that we gain by reading the fact that Yosef and the Yosef of our generation, the Rebbe, is buried together with us where we are, so that we can hop on a plane quickly, or if you live in New York, get into a car, and you're right there to be inspired and to be so close to such a holy place, etc. But now back to Menashe and Ephraim for a moment or two, or more.
Why does it say, Rabbi, may you be blessed like Ephraim? And
It's in this portion.
Oh.
He says over here that Yaakov told Yosef that he is giving his two sons, Ephraim and Menashe, the same status as his own children. They became a separate. They were both part of the 12 tribes. As Menashe is one and Ephraim is one. It's not Yosef is one. They too got the status of all the brothers. They're considered as each one as a tribe in its own, with a portion of the land of Israel and so on. So Jacob elevated their status to be like his own sons. And he says that very clear, makes that clear to him. Anyway, regarding Menashe and Ephraim, I just want to say something very quickly. On the one hand, Menashe is the firstborn. On the other hand, Ephraim receives the first blessing. So Yosef, the firstborn of Yosef was Menashe. The first, from Yaakov's perspective, the first one to receive the blessing is Ephraim. Why? In what aspect was Menashe the firstborn, and in what aspect was Ephraim the first? So you have to go back and understand, to look back to when Yosef named these two boys, when they were born. They were born, it's recorded, their birth is recorded in the portion of Miketz. And over there it says that when Menashe was born, Yosef named him Menashe. For what reason? Because the word Menashe means forgetful. And he meant to say by this that, he was ripped away from his father's house when he was 17. He ended up in prison. Very difficult life. Finally, now he has risen to greatness, and he's married and he has a child. So he said about this boy, now in my present situation, God made me forget my father's house and all my troubles and so on and so forth. And therefore he named him the Menashe. Menashe comes from the same word as Nashani, which means plucked, made me forget, sorry. And what Yosef was trying to give him this name, was to make sure that doesn't happen. That though I'm far, and I'm so successful, and I'm so this and that, I shall never forget where I come from. So Menashe was given that name to always remind Yosef never to forget your father's home. When Ephraim was born, he gave him the name Ephraim. For what reason? Also, there was a reason given. Ki hefrani elikim be'eretz oni. Because God made me prosper in the land of my affliction. So Ephraim represents Yosef prospering in a distant land. Menashe represents Yosef making sure that he doesn't forget his past. So Ephraim is the one that is a reminder of Joseph's future. He's prosperous, he's in charge, he's in control, he's doing wonderful, the present and the future. Menashe is a throwback to the past. Menashe reminds him of his past, whereas Ephraim is a reference to the future, to the present and future. Now, so what happened? So let's now talk about Yosef and Yaakov regarding these two sons. From Yaakov's perspective, what was the ultimate? We said in the beginning of the portion that why was this portion called Vayechi, even though it talks about Yaakov's death? Because these were the best years of his life. Why were they the best years of his life? Because he saw Yosef prosper. He saw the idea of Yosef bringing the ideals of Yaakov to a very foreign environment and being successful, and not only being successful and making sure that he doesn't compromise his own ideals, but he also brings Yaakov's truth to the whole world around him. It's one thing to live in a foreign land and remain yourself strong. Why? Because you're in touch with your father, and you're in touch with your past, you're in touch with your neshama on a deeper level. So even though I'm in a very foreign place and the challenges are tremendous, and I'm being pulled in every direction, I stay steadfast. I stay strong to myself, true to myself. But in Yaakov's case, Yosef's case with his children, it was even more than that. It's not only Yosef remained a tzaddik, and his children remained tzaddikim. This went much further. He was able to not only maintain his own integrity, but he also brought Yaakov's ideals to the whole Egypt. He had an influence on everyone else. So it's not only he remained himself a Jew, he remained himself strong, and was able to go into Egypt, not remain secluded, and change Egypt. Turn Egypt into a place with some kind of godly consciousness and so on and so forth, an awareness and so on. So from Yaakov's point of view, which of the two names was the more significant one, Menashe or Ephraim? The ultimate goal was Ephraim, the prospering, the future, the Jewish mission in the world, and so on. So when it comes to blessing the children, Yaakov is saying basically Ephraim, the ideal of Ephraim is the one that's really the one that stands on top, because that's the ultimate goal. But on the other hand, from Yosef's point of view, of course Yosef also recognizes that. But in order to get to that, Menashe has to be born first. Why does Menashe have to be born first? Because in order to be able to be an influence on others, you first have to be a mensch yourself. So in order for Yosef, through his children, to have an influence on the whole world, to do the job of Ephraim, to prosper, first he has to make sure he has a son, Menashe. Menashe is the one that reminds him who he is, that he should never forget his past. So in order to have Ephraim, you first need Menashe. You first have to have a link, a connection. You're tied, you're connected and attached to your father to know who you are. You can't have a future if you don't have a past. So who's born first? I asked before, if Ephraim is the ultimate goal, he's the one that gets the first blessing, he's the goal, he's the emphasis, why wasn't he born first? But the answer is you can't have Ephraim if you don't first have Menashe.
You can't have a future without having
You can't have first a successful prospering in a foreign land without first being attached and connected in the way of Menashe to his father's house. This is true for every one of us, by the way. You're born, you're educated by your parents, you're in the comforts and warmth of your father's and mother's environment, and then you go out on your own. You build your own family, you build your own life. The ultimate goal, the ultimate test to know a person if he's really, able to, if he's something, is when he builds his own. When he marries, has a family of his own. But how could you have you can't be born and then just get married. You'll never succeed in Hifrani in prospering if you go straight from birth to marriage. You must first have that anchoring, that strength, that warmth, that education, that throwback, that link to the past, to your father's ideals, in order to be able to marry and build your own family. So if you're going to talk about blessing, what's the ultimate goal, the blessing for the future? Of course, Ephraim. But why was Menashe born first? Because you can't have Ephraim without Menashe. It's true, we gotta, that's a lesson for every one of us. If you're going to make something out of yourself to become an influence on others, you must have a link to Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. If you don't have a strong link to them, and you're not aware of where you come from, how could someone you're talking to have any idea about that past, if you forgot that past? And it's all about, you're trying to convey to the whole world, what does it say about Yosef? That he was the child of Yaakov. He was the one that was supposed to bring the ideals of Yaakov to the whole world. So you have to be connected to Yaakov first.
Yaakov had other kids.
He had other kids, but Yosef was the one that was going to be doing that mostly. And he did. He became the leader of Egypt. So Menashe is the firstborn, as from the perspective of Yosef, who could never have produced an Ephraim and be so successful without having that first link to his father. But when Yaakov is blessing the kids and saying, what's the vision? The vision is Ephraim. The vision is to turn over the whole world and make it a holy place. Of course, in order to do that, you have to have Menashe first. So therefore, Menashe is born first, but Ephraim is the goal, and therefore receives the blessing.
Interesting.
That is a synopsis of this portion. And say have a good week, everyone.
Thank you, Rabbi.
And next week we start a new book of Shemais.